Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this meeting of Portsmouth City Council's Cabinet. I'm Councillor Steve Pitt. I'm the leader of the City Council, and I am the chair of this meeting. But a housekeeping before we get started. If the continuous fire alarm sounds, please evacuate the room and public gallery via the stairwells and do not attempt to use the lifts. Please assemble by Queen Victoria's statue in Guildhall Square. In order to comply with the Guildhall Trust Fire Marshal regulations, anyone who signed in at the Guildhall reception desk should sign out when leaving the building at the end of today's meeting. Everyone speaking via a microphone will be recorded and broadcast on the website, including anyone making a deputation. Members of the press and public are also permitted to record the meeting on the understanding it neither disrupts the meeting nor records those stating explicitly that they do not wish to be recorded. Please can everyone use the microphones and remember to switch them off when they've finished. We've read the report, so the officers will highlight any developments that have occurred since publication and any particular details they feel need to be brought to our attention. So I do not believe there are any deputations today, Anna. No. Okay, in that case, we will go to introductions, and to my left, Peter.
Peter Bell, City Solicitor. Thank you.
Natalie Brommer-Pearl, Chief Executive.
Anna Martin, Democratic Services.
And Richard Webb, Deputy Director of Finance.
Matthew Winnington, Cabinet Member for Community Wellbeing, Health and Care.
Matthew Gummerson, Assistant Director of Public Health.
Mike Swan, Commission Support and Safeguarding Manager, HMB.
Jo Bennett, Assistant Director, Housing Need and Supply.
Shane Galvin, Head of Housing Needs, Advice and Support.
James Harris, Senior Local Democracy Officer.
Chris Atwell, Central Services.
Yeah, I'm Councillor Lee Hunt, and I look after community safety, sport, which includes parks and open spaces.
Councillor Peter Candlish, Cabinet Member for Transport.
Councillor Hugh Mason, Cabinet Member for Planning Policy and City Development.
Councillor Dorrington, Cabinet Member for Children, Families and Education.
Kimberly Barrett, Cabinet Member for Climate Change and Greening the City.
Dave Ashmore, Cabinet Member for Environmental Services.
Darren Sanders, Cabinet Member for Housing and Tackling Homelessness.
Thank you all very much, and a particularly warm welcome to Councillor Nick Dorrington, who's taken up his Cabinet post, and this is his first Cabinet meeting with us, so welcome, Nick. Also welcome to Councillor Richard Adair, one of the other ward councillors from Nelson Ward, who's joined us for this afternoon's meeting, and to Toby from The News. Okay, are there any apologies for absence, Anna? No. Okay. In that case, we move on to, well, apart from the fact it does say a note here that Chris Ward, who's our Director of Finance and Resources and also our Section 151 officer, will be represented by Richard at today's meeting, and he's already introduced himself. Members, any declarations of interest? None, in which case we proceed to item 3, record of the previous meeting held on 11th of February 2025. Members, are we happy with the minutes of that meeting? Thank you very much. Item 4, that brings us to the Member Champions Annual Report. James Harris to present.
Thank you, Leader. The report before Cabinet is the annual update report from the Council's Member Champions. Cabinet receives this update every March in accordance with the Member Champions Protocol agreed by the portfolio holder for Community and Central Services on 5th of January 2022. The reports themselves have been submitted by the Member Champions and are before Cabinet for noting.
Thank you, James. And I understand there's also a recommendation for us to absorb one of the Member Champion roles back into the Cabinet member responsibilities following the update from Councillor Horton. Is that correct?
That is correct, and that can be formalised at the June meeting when the appointments are made.
Thank you. Okay, members, any questions or comments on the Member Champion reports? Chris.
Thank you, Leader. Just some thank yous. Thank you to you for your work as Member Champion for the Armed Forces, and thank you to Councillor Gerarda for her work around women, children and domestic violence. Special thanks to Councillor Horton, who has done such a great job around the LGBTQ+ young persons champion role over the last few years. I think it's a sensible suggestion on her part that role is rationalised as part of business as usual. And I, as Cabinet Member for Central Services and with my EDI sort of hat on, look forward to working with Nick on some of those things going forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. So, members, we're happy to note the reports, yes. And are we also happy to put, move that recommendation to the June council meeting that role would be subsumed? That's the view of Cabinet, James, so you know where we stand on it. Okay, thank you very much. In that case, item 5 is the appointment to an outside organisation, and that's back with you, James.
Thank you again, Leader. This report seeks the appointment of a Cabinet member to the current vacancy on the Portchester Crematorium Joint Committee. Councillor Horton was one of the Council's appointments on the Joint Committee. However, as the committee exercises executive functions on behalf of the member authorities, Fareham, Gosport, Havant and Portsmouth councils, she ceased to be a member of the committee when she stepped down from her Cabinet position. Cabinet is therefore requested to appoint another Cabinet member to the Joint Committee, with Councillor Ashmore having been nominated.
Thank you, James. Dave, can I confirm that you are still happy to accept the nomination?
You can.
Thank you. Members, are we all in support of that? Councillor Mason?
I'm very much in support of it as the other member of the representative on the committee. There are a lot of fairly important decisions which we will have to make, especially in view of the increasing competition from a new crematorium at Leon the Solent, and it will be very useful to go there mob-handed, the two of us.
Thank you, Hugh. Members, all in favour? Agreed. Okay. Congratulations, Dave.
Heartwarming. A glowing tribute to Councillor Mason. Thank you.
Okay, we're not glowing in the wrong side. Okay. Item 6 on the agenda this afternoon is the Health Determinants Research Collaboration, the HDRC update, and that's Matt and Zoe, I believe.
It is. Thank you, Chair. So Health Determinants Research Collaboration Portsmouth is a 5-year programme funded by the National Institute for Health and Care Research. I came to you last, it was a year ago, it doesn't feel like it, but when we just started our development year, delighted to be able to now say that we've received confirmation that we're fully funded for the next 5 years as one of 30 HDRCs nationally. So they were created by the NHR to boost research capacity and capability in local authorities. So we're there to kind of learn how to do that and be an exemplar to other areas about how we can do that. And it's really to create the infrastructure to allow more research to happen so that we can then bid for pots of funding and bring additional resource into the city. The HDRC itself is not there to deliver the research. But our model, which is set out in summary in section 4 of the report, is really about kind of learning by doing. So we will be testing some of those ways of doing research and evaluation to support projects to help us better understand what works in terms of tackling health inequalities and what evidence is useful to decision makers in the city about what we can do about that. Section 5 lists some of the progress in our development year. I won't go through all that now, but it's a collaboration between the council, Hive Portsmouth, representing communities in the city, and the University of Portsmouth. So a lot of it's about making those connections and building those relationships over the last year. And we'll start kind of shouting more about what we're doing over the next year as the team's all recruited and in place, and there'll be lots more then about how you can get involved, how communities in the city can get involved, and how we can start helping others in the city to kind of address these long-standing challenges. We'll report annually to Cabinet on progress. I'm really looking forward to working on this over the next 5 years. Happy to take any questions if you have any.
Only one, Matt. This is specific to Portsmouth. Have we got any idea, and the answer is probably no, because the answer is no to pretty much every question to do with this. Have we got any idea how local government reorganisation may impact on it?
No, it has been raised on the national meetings of all the HDRCs that the NIHR convene. They are aware that it's an unknown, but they don't know anything yet either. So no answers yet, I'm afraid.
It's a known unknown. Okay. Matt, did you want to come in?
Yes, thank you, and thank you, Matt and Zoe, for coming to present today. This is actually hot-footed. I was slightly only just made the meeting time, and Matt and Zoe as well, because we were just at a meeting about some of the work we're doing in both Paulsgrove and Portsea, which actually dovetails very nicely with HDRC, though it was those two bits of work were instigated before we got funding for the HDRC, even the pilot year. It's the kind of work that we can actually make massive use of, because it's all about people in their communities making a difference to their communities. Because after all, the whole point of this work is saying to people in Portsmouth, you know your city best, you know your communities best, and you can not just give ideas to other organisations about what to do, but actually you can do the research yourself and train up and then engage with your communities and make a difference from that very bottom-up approach, which is the nature of our particular scheme here in Portsmouth. So I'm really pleased we finally got the approval of funding, which we knew about for some time but couldn't say anything because it was all on the Department of Health and I think the NHS to actually officially announce that we've been awarded it from NIHR. But this is a 5-year funding. It is £5 million. It is a lot of money, but it's going to make a real difference, not just to what people can do in their communities for themselves, but it's also going to inform what the council does right across everything it does, what other organisations, other statutory organisations out there, so the NHS, schools, other statutory organisations, national government departments, what they can do, but also things like businesses. So it's a huge amount of work that's going to make a huge amount of difference, and I'm really, really pleased that we can now say we've got 5 years to go forwards and we can really make the most of it, and we already are. Let's be under no mistake. This has already started, and we're already working really well with our communities, and we can do much more of this.
Thank you, Matthew. Colleagues, any other comments or questions? No, we're all happy to note that as an update, and we look forward to the next update. Thank you very much. Over to item 7 now, which is the rough sleeping funding update. Who's going first? Okay.
That will be me, Leader. Thank you. So the purpose of my report was to update on the grant funding available for rough sleeping services for 2025-26 and what interventions these will support in Portsmouth, including detail of necessary changes to be made to the current provision. Would you like me to take you through the report section by section, or just a brief summary?
Highlights.
Highlights. Okay. So the report sets out the local context in terms of rough sleeping in Portsmouth, and how these services are non-statutory in nature, and they have up until now been funded by 2 ring-fenced grants. And we also note that rough sleeping numbers in the last few years are rising nationally across the country. However, this year in Portsmouth, we have seen a slight reduction, which is bucking the national trend. So the grants that we receive have been funding a variety of services in the city, most notably a large support contract with a commission provider. So that contract includes our homeless day service, our rough sleeping hub. It includes the rough sleeping accommodation across 3 sites in the city, the blocks that we purchased following the COVID-19 pandemic. And it provides funding for our outreach team that go out and engage with rough sleepers where they may be bedded down in the city. And year on year, we have seen a shortfall in that funding increase as the costs of delivering that service, the costs of that contract have increased through inflation, but the grant allowances, the grant allocations have remained the same year on year. So what we need to do effectively is plan for the future. We have been advised that, well, we haven't been given firm detail around what future grant funding arrangements will look like for homelessness services, but we are aware that the shortfall will continue to increase unless we redesign our services and seek alternative models of funding for them. So the proposals are to redesign the accommodation element of the offer and explore alternative funding models for that through utilising exempt housing benefit charges. And then alongside that, we will be bringing the homeless day service, the rough sleeping hub element of the service, in-house, and that will continue to be funded through the funding, the grant funding that we receive. That is expected to help us to reduce the shortfall in terms of the pressure on the council budget. And the redesign of services will also be informed through the wider work that we're engaging in with partners around the homelessness strategy and the delivery of our strategy through the Homelessness Partnership Board. One of the actions from that board is a citywide review of supported housing provision, which is currently underway and is expected to be completed in May. And then that will inform the commissioning and procurement process for the coming year and to enable newly designed services to start in 2026-27.
Thank you very much indeed. I've got a couple of questions before I go to colleagues. There was some reporting that happened about £5.7 million coming in for homelessness funding into Portsmouth, with an implication that that was new funding and it was in some way linked to the council's deficit in year around temporary accommodation. I'd like some clarity around that, please.
That was not additional funding. It was an amalgamation of the grants that were already expected to be received in the city. So the number correlated to the pressure that we were feeling, but it wasn't a release on the existing year's overspend.
And of the 5.7 million, what was additional, if anything, towards dealing with the temporary accommodation issue that we're currently facing?
There was an increase this year in the homeless prevention grant, but that had within it a ring fence around the amount that could actually be allocated to temporary accommodation. So we received just over £1 million this year, more than we had done in previous years. And half of that would have been able to be used for that. So it was far, far less than we needed to deal with the pressure.
Thanks, Joe. Just thought it was worth clarifying that. Darren, did you want to come in?
Thanks, Stephen. Very, very helpful with that. This report contains both a triumph for the city and a warning about the future. It is a triumph because rough sleeping in this city is going down. That is not true of much of the rest of the South East. We know that there are various places like Greater Manchester and Bournemouth, Christchurch and Poole and other places which are regarded as exemplars. Well, we are an exemplar in our own way. And that is down to the service that we have provided. And the level of support in particular we have provided to rough sleepers. So this is a triumph, I have to say, for this city and everyone who's pulled together to make the lives of those living on the streets easier, giving them safe and secure accommodation. But in section 7 of this report, there lies various warnings. Here's the first one, and it relates to the question the leader asked. There is, in the next financial year, not one penny more for rough sleepers, for tackling rough sleeping in this city than the former Conservative government is giving us now. Not one penny. And we have to work within that. We are about £400,000 short as a result of that, not least the fact that charities in this city who are getting rough sleepers off the streets have to pay the increased national insurance charges. I personally find that disgraceful and immoral, but it does mean we're £400,000 short, and that has to be made up from somewhere. The second relates to paragraph 7.4, which is the scheme we use is what is politely and diplomatically described as an outlier in terms of its operating cost. It's very clear that what we do works. It's also very clear that what we do costs a lot, but investment matters. And that's why we're working very hard to try and see if we can work through this in future, because the warnings lie in 7.1. It is likely that there will be no specific money next year to deal with rough sleeping, not a penny. And that is our central working assumption as a council. Not a single penny to get people off the streets, because the government calls them non-priority homeless. Again, immoral and disgraceful, but that's what we have to deal with. And so if we're facing one grant for homelessness in the city, that means that we will be forced, because we'll be told, to deal with the people that we have a legal duty to house. And that's why the £31 million investment in temporary accommodation, designed, we believe, to cut the temporary accommodation bill by £6 million per year, not the £600,000 a year the Labour government has chosen to do, will help a lot, perhaps to relieve some of that pressure and get some of the most vulnerable people in our city out of the doorways and into safe and secure accommodation. But that will require changes. It will require difficult decisions. And when I say difficult decisions, it means people ain't going to be happy. But we're going to have to do this. Because at the moment, I see a government that is not taking rough sleeping as seriously as it should do and seems to be more interested in watching the pennies than trying to get people off the streets. We will continue to work constructively with the relevant government departments, many of whom have been very kind to us, are very patient with us over the past year as we've explained our things and our issues, because what we do works, and we should be proud of that. But the warning is there. The government is putting that at risk. Unless they work with us on bold and radical initiatives, it won't be we who suffer. We'll have a roof over our head. It'll be people who are sleeping in our shop doorways, and that is not acceptable. Thank you, Steve.
Thank you, Darren. Just another question, and that's of the people that go through that pathway that we currently have, how many people were in the last year were we able to transition on to stable accommodation and better life outcomes than they had when they entered the pathway?
We looked at a 12-month period. It's not exactly the last year, but the 12-month period, July 23 through to end of June 24. As I recall off the top of my head, it was 302 individuals moved into the pathway in that 12-month period, and 155 moved on positively.
Yes, so the reason I asked about that is the sums seem large, but when you're talking about 155 people having positive outcomes in their lives and getting back to being on the journey to being productive citizens within society, compared to the cost of maintaining those people with broken lives and all the implications of that around mental health services, adult social care, future medical needs, etc., and dealing with the fact that their life expectancies are anticipated to be severely reduced because of being homeless, it's actually not very much money at all. And that's why it's so important that we as an administration keep making this point to government, that penny pinching and bean counting, which seems to be Rachel from accounts, as she was referred to the other day, and I thought, what a wonderful description of her modus operandi, that all of it has to balance. Well, yeah, sure it does, but you're balancing out people's lives here. Just remember that when you're making these decisions in number 11 Downing Street. Councillor Hunt.
What we've done here over a long period of time, back to the days that Dan was pictured in the news in front of the old registry with the keys and so on, it seems a fair while back now. But that's the building that we own, and we own, of course, the other two buildings that form this pathway, and I'm sure Toby at the news understands what buildings I'm talking about. And people progress through this pathway and get back into, for want of a better word, mainstream living, or they go into supported housing and to continue to receive support from the City Council, help with benefits and all these other sorts of things which bring them back into a way of life, and many go back into jobs, I understand. And Jo, I think, can probably help me. She told me about one man years back through divorce. I'm going to come to my point in a minute. Through divorce, ended up on the street, and he hit drugs and alcohol and so on, and he was rehabilitated through this program that Darren's describing, what Councillor Sanders is describing right now, and he got into a job, and I believe was then commuting back and forwards to London on a £50,000 a year salary. It's just an example, because I think sometimes we use words and sentences and things like that, and we don't really understand the coalface impact, the grassroots impact of what we do and the decisions that we make and the effort that officers put in. I think sometimes it's really important to talk about these things in this way. And I think last time I heard that 600 people, that's the last time, 600 people have gone through this program. It must be more by now, I would have thought. many, many, many more. And that's what has been enabled. The reason I wanted to come in on this is not only to talk about that, but those 3 buildings are assets. And the Chief Executive might have a view on this. But if this government forces shotgun wedding upon us to join in with all these other councils who have, they don't have a debt perhaps, but Hampshire County Council we certainly know has. They are assets in the same way that the international port is an asset. And if we are forced to go in with them and we arrive at day 1 with this new authority and it's straight away in debt, we're going to have to sell off assets, I would have thought. And everything that we do now, everything we're talking about in peacetime, as it were, I wonder if this highly successful programme and that the assets that we use, the buildings, to help people through this trial in their life, would be sold off in order to pay down the debt of Hampshire and other places. Now, is this possible? I say to the Chief Executive. How can we ring fence them?
If I could come in there. So I think, obviously, this is ahead of what the local government review will be presenting to us. We don't know.
But I like to plan.
Yeah. I appreciate that. But I think in terms of these assets, I think the assets are held by the HRA. So the HRA will safeguard those assets going forward. So there has to be an exercise when we do end up amalgamated with other authorities, how our HRAs over time, because they are separate accounts that belong to the tenants' fund. It's the tenants' funding that's there. But obviously the funding of it, some of it comes from the general fund. I know the interest, etc., comes from the general fund. But it will be conversations that we'll have to have amongst the 800 ones that we'll have to have as LGR progresses.
Thanks. I agree with you, Lee, and you know I do, about a lot of this. I think the issue isn't so much the buildings, which are held within the housing revenue account and so are separate to the wider discussions around reorganisation. But what is even more important is the services that help the people who live within those buildings. They are in the general fund. They are not statutory because the government believes, both the Tories and Labour believe, that rough sleepers are not priority homeless, so we do not have a statutory duty to house, which means that if the nightmare scenario that myself and the leader believe will happen, and we're going to go bust on day 1, if we don't get the money from government, then these are the sorts of services and those are the sorts of people who will suffer. And that, to me, is even worse than the state of the buildings we own, because this is about people. Everything we do in this environment is about people. We as an administration told the officers to go big or go home. Well, the officers have come up with a plan that has meant we have gone big, and it means more people are off the streets and have a home to go to. And you are right, Lee, that support, that help, which is already an outlier, and that's bad news, will be under threat, under any potential shotgun marriage. That's what worries me, not the buildings. So you're right to raise that issue, Lee, and it is going to be it's not going to be 800, it's going to be 1,200, 1,500, 1,600 conversations that are going to be had over the next several months. So thank you for raising it.
So just for absolute clarity, the total amount of money that we currently spend, not receive, but spend on supporting the homelessness pathway is how much?
So the contract this year with SSJ is £1,069,600. If we were to extend the contract in full with all of the services as they are at the moment, it's about 1,350,000 that we would be looking at. So hence why the proposal is to keep the pathway, take the rough sleeping hub and the outreach service out of that. And what that will mean is that effectively the contract will cost the same for the coming year. So yeah, it's 1,070,000.
The reason I asked that is that if we take 1,069,600 and divide it by 155, it's £6,900 per person to get people's lives back on track. And the case study that Councillor Hunt referred to, the public got its money back through tax from that individual in 12 months. So it's extraordinary that, and I was right at the heart of all of this during the pandemic on the weekly meetings we were having after the government said get everyone in, we got everyone in, and then as the pandemic was starting to ease, it was what are we going to do now, because that government didn't have a plan B either, and we were having lots of conversations, but Darren and Gerald and I were on those calls at the time, and we were absolutely clear we're not going to do what other local authorities ended up doing, which was to shut those hotels and send everybody back out onto the streets. And it happened in the local authorities not all that far away from here. And we didn't do that. We set up this scheme, which was innovative, and it kept people housed, and it kept them on that pathway, and it got hundreds of people back into meaningful lives. And if this government is any more serious about solving the homeless crisis than the previous one was, then it needs to be rolling out what it's doing in Portsmouth across the country, not cutting what it's doing here in Portsmouth. Will they listen? That remains to be seen. Nick.
Just to put a small bit of context into the conversation we're having at the moment, as some of you are aware, but some of you may not have been, in my youth and in my teens, I found myself homeless. I found myself making a lot of very poor decisions and poor judgments. I was a drain on the system. I was a drain on the benefit system. I was a drain on the health system. I was a drain on many, many systems. The government, or this government in particular, took a chance on me. This government spent some money, gave me some guidance, put me through the pathways, got me the help that I needed, and as a result of that, I've gone on to be a productive person in this society. I've raised a family, I have a wife, I'm an employer of local people, I pay more in tax in a week than what this government put into me in the first place, and I am so grateful to that pathway. It is fundamentally important that we continue to invest in those people.
Thank you, Nick. Matt?
Thank you, Nick, for actually the kernel of what I was going to talk about. This government at the moment seems to be obsessed, as the leader said, with penny pinching. We're looking at the money they spend, they outlay, or the money is outlaid in services. There seems to be absolutely no concept whatsoever about spending to save, something that in local government we have had to do for years, decades. It is something that central government really struggles with. We see this all the time with decisions on funding around some NHS services as well, certainly around social care, which still remains absolutely on its knees. But at this council, we're investing £31 million into temporary accommodation. £31 million. Now, that is a spend to save. And it's not just to save this council money, it's to save the NHS money. It's to save the benefit system money. It's to save money that national government spends on all kinds of things. It's to save the criminal justice system money. Everything is about spending to save. Now, in reality, we're doing that to directly support people in this city. But ultimately, it's going to save the entire statutory system money. So we are spending to save in that way. And we're spending to save by continuing to invest in our rough sleeping pathway, even though the government is not properly funding it. The government is not properly funding it for one main reason, that they cost the system more by sticking up national insurance contributions for employers, sticking up national insurance contributions for our contractor, a charity who runs our service. That's why we were told about what the increase, if we did everything exactly the same as now, why it would cost best part of 200,000, I think it was over £200,000 more. That's the vast majority why it would cost so much more. The government did it themselves, they haven't backed that up, and they're costing our charity, our charity partner, Society St James, more. So that's why we've had to spend an awful lot of time about how we're going to manage this now and how we're going to manage this into the future. So spend our time doing this, doesn't cost the government anything, does cost this council stuff, and we have amazing officers and people who work in these services that make sure that we can do this, rather than, as the leader said, other authorities who just jacked it in and said, you can go back out on the streets. So my particular interest, obviously, with this is the way that it works in with the health work we do. So we work with people to make sure that they have, for people with additional complex needs, that they have the right accommodation. We have the grants that we have from the public health grants that we do for the rough sleeping support service for people's health. But all of this, again, is subject to that same pressure, because the cost to the public health grant is the same in terms of increased costs for our contractor. And like everyone else, because unlike some other parts of the system, charities aren't protected. So we are doing fantastic work in this city, which we should be very proud of. We are also under huge threat by a government who seems to be more interested in penny pinching, but also messing around with local government reorganisation. We had an article today from Polly Toynbee, who sometimes has the ear of the Labour Party and sometimes doesn't. I hope she has the ear of the Labour Party at the moment. Because if any Labour Party minister looked at that article today, they might think again about the upheaval they're doing with local government reorganisation when there are real issues every single day with things like temporary accommodation, social care, housing, planning, all these things that they've said are priorities. They said before the election that they were priorities, but they're messing around doing things that puts more things at risk. So I'd like to thank so much everyone who works, both from the council and our outside contractors who work in the rough sleeping pathway, who work to support our rough sleepers and to make sure that they have a pathway in life, as Councillor Dorrington has just been talking about, because that is what you can do. That is the way that these things can work. £6,000 for one person. It's not a lot of money. Think what they could do if they really invested that and bumped it up maybe to £10,000. They could, or stay at £6,000, you could support even more around the country. You would have minimal people on the streets in the country. This does make me angry because it's so short-sighted, and this government is no better than the last one, because this government still has short-sighted solutions, is fiddling round when Rome burns and messing around and doing big-ticket things. So I commend our plan going forwards. I know we will work incredibly hard, and from the public health side, we will support this as much as we possibly can. And we, as Liberal Democrat administration of this city, will go back to government and say, you support us. We will go to the LGA and support anything they do to try and say, we need support on this. But it is also a really key thing. If we're part of a shotgun marriage with a surrounding area that hasn't invested in this, that hasn't invested in the things you need to do, where you would have huge gaps in this kind of provision, almost certainly we wouldn't be able to do that, and that's forgetting about the fact that it'd be almost bust from the beginning because of social care. So hands off Portsmouth. Let us get on with things, and for goodness sake, government, fund us properly so we can actually produce good services continually and not level down.
Thank you, Matt. The analogy I've been using on LGR over the last week in trying to explain it to people is it's equivalent of having a patient lying on a gurney waiting to have life-saving surgery and the surgeon walking up to them and saying, which suit of clothes would you like to wear on the other side? It's a complete and utter nonsense, and it's driving us all bananas. And it's sure to do so for quite some time, especially over serious things like this, which was what all our focus should be on, and not on tinkering around with borders. Colleagues will have heard me use this analogy a lot, and actually I can't think of anything where this is more appropriate. But I often talk about overflowing sinks. And when you've got overflowing sinks, you don't go and buy more buckets, you turn the tap off. And this proves that that works. If you invest at the right end, you can reduce the flow. We're seeing that in the actual figures. So just at the point when we're starting to really be able to evidence the outstanding work that this pathway has achieved and the real lives that it's changing, we have a government that's basically pulling the plug. Which I think, to be honest, is a disgrace. But we are where we are. Thank you for bringing the report today. Any other final comments from colleagues? But we note the report, and we will continue to lobby the government over the coming months as we work out how we're going to do the very best we can for people with the resources that we have got available. Thank you very much for being here. Okay, item 8 today, forward plan emission notice. That's the Treasury Management Policy 2025-2026. Richard, over to you.
Thank you, Leader. The purpose of this report is to seek Cabinet endorsement of the proposed annual Treasury Management Policy for 25-26. This will also require full Council approval. The policy provides the operational framework for 2 key Treasury activities. Firstly, it considers the borrowing position of the Council and takes a forward look at the Council's borrowing needs, which is linked to the Council's capital expenditure plans and cash flow requirements. Secondly, it defines the operational parameters for the investment of surplus cash. This is called the Annual Investment Strategy and sets out the Council's approach to managing risk. The risk is managed through setting limits on the length of time investments can be placed, geographical limits, country limits, as well as the type of institutions the Council can invest in, such as based on credit ratings, etc. It is important to note that the Council applies the security, liquidity and yield principles, which seek to ensure that for any investments, we firstly consider the security of that investment, our liquidity needs, and once the first 2 of these criteria have been met, we will then seek to maximise the return or yield available on those investments. I'd just also like to highlight that there are no significant changes in either the operational framework or the approach to risk compared to last year's strategy. I'm happy to answer any questions you have.
Well, they say that if you do as you always did, you get what you always got. But actually, in this instance, that's a good thing. Members, any comments? Are we happy to Councillor Mason, please?
I assume we're taking item 8 and item 9 together. And on page 82, section 4.4, there is a section on the environmental, social and governance, the ECG factors, which are taken into account in our investments. And it talks about ECG ratings, ESG ratings. Who makes those? How are they made? And has it made any appreciable difference, or that you know of, in the way in which we are investing our own money?
Okay, thank you. So, first of all, I just highlight that before we consider the ESG ratings, we do consider the other 3 things that I've just mentioned, which are security, liquidity, and yield. I haven't got any specific details on the impact that consideration has had on our investment plans, but we do take it into account, and they are provided by an investment assessment, same as the credit rating type assessments that we use. So they're done by external parties. We don't do those assessments ourselves.
Well, who does them for us then? Who do we get them from?
I'd have to double check that and come back to you.
Okay, if you can come back to me on that one, because this is something which is relatively new in our Treasury management, and it'll be interesting to know actually how it works and what its impact is likely to be.
Members, any other comments or questions? Peter, and then Lee.
So my question is, there is a lot of worrying news from around the country about the... Sorry, Chair. There's a lot of worrying news from around the country about the state of local government finances, including the level of debt that is held. And locally, Hampshire County Council is often cited as a place that could fall into bankruptcy quite soon, and I know that Southampton has had to receive some emergency money. I have read all 32 pages of the report, I promise, but could you just simply confirm that Portsmouth City Council's financial position is currently good and that we have a sensible, sound and sustainable level of debt as we speak now? I know that you cannot be held responsible for anything that might come in the future if we're forced into some form of shotgun marriage with other places, but where Portsmouth City Council is today.
Okay, so I'm going to refer you back to the budget report that we had at our previous meeting, where we presented the budget and highlighted the financial stability of the council in there and the assessment by Chris Ward, the Section 151 officer, around the resilience and the future forecasts for the financial position of the local authority. As it highlighted in that report, looking at our revenue budgets, we had a deficit forecast based on the information that we have at the moment of £9 million over 3 years, and we'd need £3 million worth of savings targets to balance that. So that sets the context at which the budget was set and the financial resilience of the council. This policy here is talking about how we actually manage and control both our borrowing and make sure that we're borrowing at the right levels of interest rates, and that we structure that borrowing over a period of time so that we're not having to, say, refinance all of our debt at one specific point in time when interest rates may not be favourable. We try and spread that over a longer period so that we have a balanced profile of debt, and it also how we manage and ensure that all of the investments, because all of the surplus cash that we are investing is cash that is already planned to be spent somewhere, either on a capital project or on the revenue budget. So we need to make sure that that cash investment is secure and is liquid for the time when we need to utilise it, as highlighted in those principles that I've talked about, and then we'll make sure that we maintain yield to ensure that we get the maximum yield for that investment for the City Council. Because as you have seen in our previous budget monitoring reports, our treasury management activities have actually been quite beneficial over the last few years and supported our revenue budgets. So I hope that gives you the confidence that it's all linked together, but you need to look at the budget report alongside this and the capital strategy that was presented last full council meeting.
No, thank you. That's very reassuring to hear. It sounds like we have a strong and sensible position.
Councillor Hunt, please.
Yeah, I think you were saying that we are sound here financially overall. That's the impression that I got. Anyway, so I want to tease this out even further, because page 58, or page 4 in your report, Richard, it talks here a lot about investments and capital. It's nothing specific relating to investments and capital, and it talks about, I think, our commercial property investments and so on. It says excluding, but I want to talk about that because we already know that if we join this, we're forced into having this mega council. I just want some straight answers from the officers. If we are forced to join this mega council, and on the first day that we are in debt, because it sounds to me, unless, as Councillor Sanders says, the government step in with money, which is highly unlikely, I would have thought, because we're going to be spending a lot of money on a war. If it comes along, these assets, are they safe? Will we have to sell them? And I'm talking about the international port, because council taxpayers here invested a great deal of money, a huge amount of money into the port that belongs to the council. So if we were to come along and we find that this new mega council is so much in debt, which it probably will be, because that was the case in Somerset, Could the council, that new council, could it set off the international port into the pay down this debt and all of our commercial property assets, those sorts of things? Could that happen?
It's difficult for me to answer a hypothetical question, but in terms of those investments that you've highlighted, both the port and the commercial property portfolio, they all generate income streams for the City Council and offset the revenue expenditure for the City Council. So actually they're contributing to providing an income stream to maintain those services that you've been talking about today. So, for example, the port generates around £9 million a year for the City Council. So I think those decisions need to be made at the time when we can see the facts in front of us. I wouldn't want to hypothetically answer that at this point.
That's a very fair answer. So that £9 million would then be shared out between Portsmouth, Havant, Gosport, Fareham, and any other bits that we're taking in. So this city that's invested into that port will now see all of that investment shared out, the benefit of it in the upcoming years shared out between all those other places that we will be forced to take on. So the services here, the sorts we were talking about just now, around the homes, will have less money within this city to depend on cultural services, all the free events that we do, all the stuff on the common, all these things are going to see way less money than before to invest in them. It's probably a bit unfair to unload that on you right now, and I think I've made my point, so you don't have to reply, Richard. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hunt. Councillor Sanders.
Thank you. I won't ask you to ask impossible questions either. But I do think it's important, some of the issues that Lee has raised, particularly because we are a more entrepreneurial authority than perhaps some of the authorities around us, and particularly other places like Hampshire. Those sorts of issues really do matter as to whether this whole thing is going to be viable or not. Can I suggest that these issues are put into pages 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 or 27 of the report that we've got to do on the 21st of March, the interim plan? Of what this may look like, and if not, certainly for the final plan, because the government does talk about barriers and opportunities, and what we don't want to do is to shoot ourselves in the foot, which we may do if we're not careful, and not put these things forwards, because I think we have to be honest with government about the situation, because if we're not, then it's going to be our residents who are going to be hit in a way they haven't been hit because of the proactive and constructive policies outlined in this report. I hope we're able to put it in somewhere in the plan that we've got on the 21st of March.
Leader, sorry, before you summarise, I think the point that we're coming to here is that some of the things, a lot of the things we do here are really good and to a certain extent look quite rosy here in Portsmouth. But at the moment, everything we're considering doing when we do it in Cabinet, when we talk to anyone, the health warning is missing in these reports because within 2, 3 or even 4 years, a lot of what we're talking about now could change dramatically. So I think we have to have a mechanism for understanding as we plan forward. I know it's very difficult for officers right now because they're not getting the information from the government, and maybe that will change soon, I don't know. But nobody seems to know very much about very much at all. But, we have to have an understanding on behalf of the people that elect us to say, this is going on, it all looks okay now, it looks fine now. But as we move closer and closer and closer, we have to have an understanding what the impacts might be on what we're doing. And at the moment, that's not coming through in reports. Not through any reason that the officers want to avoid saying anything because they don't really know. But I think we really have had to attach a health warning to all our decisions here onwards.
I agree, because we just don't know what's going to happen. We also don't know whether the government at some point will freeze our budget or our assets because they're being asked to merge into another local authority and what the implications of that could may be. There are literally hundreds and hundreds of questions. I think Natalie's assessment was 700 to 800 questions when we were talking earlier on that need answers. And at the moment we've got, well, you've got to go and do this, and that's pretty much it. We know it's 500,000 people. We know that we've been told we're too small and we need to expand. We know that they're getting rid of county councils and district and borough councils. And we know they expect all of this to happen and be in place and up and running, everything being lovely by 2028. These are the only things that we know. All of the stuff we need to know in order to be able to do anything like a proper job of sorting all this out are still vague, and every time we speak to civil servants, we get different answers. It's like being in an episode of The Thick of It, as I've said before. They should be called spuds, not spads. Lee.
Yeah, you know I'm really vexed about this, of course. I mean, all of our conversations in the council have been, in the cabinet and in the group have been, and the council are difficult right now. But we know these things. We know them. But people out there just don't. They have really no idea what's going on at all. And it's coming down the track like a thundering train towards March 21. Is it time for us to say to the government, if you are going to do this to the people that we represent, you should fund a referendum? That can't be our position because we haven't got the money to do it. It's not in the budget. We know that. I know that. But if the government want to change the way people here get their local government, then they should fund a referendum and ask the people of Portsmouth if that's what they want. I don't think they will because they know what the answer will be. But we should really have a referendum before they go much further down this track. And that referendum should be financed by this government because they're doing to us.
No, I agree. And actually, in the article that's been referred to already by Polly Toynbee, she talks about a commission in there, which is what I also put in the statement I brought to full council last week, because this needs to be done with broader consultation. But on the devolution question, we were told there's a consultation, it's not a referendum, we're only asking the questions we want to ask, we're not doing a referendum on this, and we've also, as you're aware, been told that we don't care what you think. So if they don't care what the councils think that are delivering the services, they obviously don't care at all what the public think about this either, and they're not going to fund any of that to happen. So we are where we are, and we need to keep making the case to government that consultation is extremely important, and that is why we are specifically going to be putting that in our response to government on the 21st of March, that consultation must happen during the next period because they've given no time whatsoever for meaningful conversation to happen before the 21st of March consultation.
This is my last stab at it, Leader, because I want people who we represent to tell us and to tell the government and to tell the two MPs here what they want. And I was wondering then, if we haven't got the mechanism or the time to do it, maybe the news should take up the challenge. Maybe the news should ask the people of Portsmouth, what do you want? Do you want to go in with Hampshire, parts of Hampshire and Fareham and Gosport and all these other places? Ask the news, ask the editor of the news if they would be willing to lead on that campaign. We, even as a political party, don't have the time to make that kind of, we're doing our level best to ask people, but it's almost impossible in the time allowed.
No, agreed, and Toby's here, so I'm sure he's heard that loud and clear. And once we know what the submission is on 21st of March, then perhaps they'll actually go out and ask that question. I do want to bring this debate to a conclusion because people have had multiple goes round it. But Matt, I'll come back to you and then I'll go to Richard.
I'll say it's the only time I've spoken on this item,
Yeah.
Leader. I just wanted to make 2 points, and thank you for the for what Richard has said and in response to Peter's question. When I was talking about the £31 million earlier for temporary accommodation funding, That we can only do that because we are a sustainable authority. We would not be able to do that if we weren't a sustainable authority. And there has been some individuals who have said that because we can't, because we're asking for more money for temporary accommodation, which every council is in the country, let's be, and for things like this and social care, you always want it properly funded, because the way that local government funding is, you have to rely on a lot of things from the government, and if you don't get that, then you have to cut other services. That's the way local government works. However, your sustainability is based on the things you can invest in. We wouldn't be able to invest in £31 million if we were not a sustainable authority. We just wouldn't be able to do it. We'd be having to sell off our assets like Southampton's had to. We'd have to be looking to sell off our assets like Hampshire may well have to, because they are in such a hole by the end of this calendar year, as they have made very clear to the Treasury. So you've got that aspect of it. And then going back to something I said at full council last week in terms of commission. We asked for that specifically because there has not been a commission on local government that has seen its way all the way through to its conclusions and been implemented since the 1880s in this country. The last one in the late 60s, early 70s was quashed. It was overruled and then it was replaced with the hodgepodge that we ended up with today. So it really is something that we should be proud of, all that work we've done. And I've said this so many times, it's not just this administration, it's the other parties that have run this council for the last 40 to 50 years. Since 1973, since we became a unitary in the 1990s, we should be absolutely grateful to the good stewardship that councillors and council officers and the people of this city have put into it. And I do agree with Councillor Hunt's thing, just to wrap up. Yes, the news should be asking, not just if the people of Portsmouth want to be part of an authority that includes surrounding areas of Hampshire, but the people of Havant, Gosport, Fareham, if they want to be in an authority with each other and with Portsmouth. Because no one else is going to ask them. The government isn't interested at all. They're not interested in individual people's opinions. They're only interested in a scheme that has been come up with by the Treasury. A Treasury which, while they're interested in that, isn't interested in actually making sure that Portsmouth is not on its own by being sustainable, then every council is sustainable, which is actually, in the end, that's what I want. I want local government to be sustainable across this country and not have council after council after council go to the wall.
Thank you, Matt. Richard?
Yeah, thank you, Leader. I just wanted to respond a bit further to Councillor Mason's query a bit earlier about credit ratings. So the ESG credit ratings are derived from large credible organisations that provide professional service in that, such as credit referencing agencies. We also, just for your reference, as we sort of highlight in the policy, we do also retain a company called MUFG Corporate Markets, formerly known as Link, as our Treasury advisors. But if you do want specific names of who we use for credit referencing agencies, then I'll get that for you.
Thank you. Are we there, the members? Okay. In that case, we have some recommendations to approve, and that there are on page 2. You'll note that there are recommendations: 1 with Roman numerals 1 and 2, 2, 3, and 3 has Roman numerals 1 to 4, and then point 4 and point 5. Are we happy to approve all of those? Thank you very much. In that case, so approved, and that concludes today's meeting of Cabinet. Thank you all for your contributions today, and thank you to the News for attending and showing interest in the meeting.